Am I doing too much? No, sometimes I wonder, am I doing enough? Okay, I'm ready for my...
So, the two stars reportedly couldn't stand each other. And to make matters worse, the film couldn't even include the classic 7 dwarfs that audiences expected. Before we dive into how everything spiraled out of control, take a second to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel if you love deep, cinematic breakdowns like this. Because this story isn't just about a movie, it's about how the world's most powerful entertainment company managed to turn one of its most iconic fairy tales into a full-blown cultural battleground. How does a studio that practically invented fairy tale magic spend over $200 million, completely rewrite a beloved princess from the ground up, and still walk away with one of the coldest, most awkward box office openings in its century-long history? The answer begins with ambition, veers straight into controversy, and ends up as comedy fodder for late-night hosts like Bill Maher. By the time opening weekend arrived, the only thing whiter than the movie's title screen was the blank sheet Disney used to calculate its mounting losses. For nearly a decade, the Snow White remake glimmered on Disney's production calendar like a guaranteed home run. Announced back in 2016, it was supposed to be the crown jewel of the studio's live-action renaissance, a high-budget, nostalgia-driven project that would combine the whimsical spirit of the original with the social consciousness of modern Hollywood. Greta Gerwig was brought in to polish the script, promising sharp, intelligent humor and a progressive edge. The musical duo Benj Pasek and Justin Paul, famous for their work on La La Land and The Greatest Showman, were enlisted to craft brand new songs that could charm a new generation. The project was perfectly timed. A spring 2024 release meant it would glide effortlessly into the hearts and wallets of families craving something magical and familiar. But the magic didn't last. As the production trudged forward, the controversies surrounding Disney's Snow White remake made it painfully clear that the studio had stepped into a cultural minefield. The first sign of trouble came when the dual WGA and SAG-AFTRA strikes brought Hollywood to a screeching halt, forcing Disney to push the release date a full year to March 23rd, 2025. What looked like a logistical decision was actually an unmistakable sign of anxiety beneath the fairy dust. Delays are always expensive, but delays on a massive UK backlot with hundreds of crew members, elaborate sets, and strict union contracts can be financially devastating. By the time the final slate clapped, insiders whispered that the production budget had ballooned past a staggering $240 million, a figure later confirmed by multiple industry trades. Then came another headline. An environmental audit commissioned by The Guardian revealed that the film's production had generated over 3,153 tons of CO2 emissions, an even heavier carbon footprint than the latest Fast and Furious installment. For a movie preaching modern values and responsibility, the irony was brutal. The internet, already circling the project like vultures, smelled blood in the water. Meme pages mocked the eco-friendly princess whose film polluted like a jet fleet. But the spark that truly ignited the inferno wasn't money, or climate audits, or production delays. It was one short, seemingly harmless interview. In late 2022, Extra sat down with Rachel Zegler, the rising star who had just come off her acclaimed debut in West Side Story. She had been handpicked to play Disney's first Latina Snow White, a bold move the company hoped would symbolize diversity and progress. Instead, it detonated a PR bomb. When asked about the 1937 original, Zegler laughed and said, "The cartoon is about a guy who literally stalks her. Weird. She added that her version of Snow White isn't going to be saved by the prince. She's going to be the leader her people need." The comment, clipped and shared across TikTok, was trimmed into 8 damning seconds that made her sound like she despised the very movie she was remaking. Within hours, backlash erupted. The clip spread like wildfire across social media, igniting a culture war that split the internet in two. Some applauded her for pushing a modern feminist spin on an outdated story. Others accused her of arrogance and disrespect toward a classic that had shaped generations. Overnight, the hashtag #NotMySnowWhite began trending, with thousands of users mocking her tone, her comments, and even her youth. Zegler, only 23 and raised in the hyper-reactive world of TikTok, fired back. She doubled down on her statements, tweeting about empowerment and agency, and later weaving political commentary, touching on global issues and even elections in Gaza, into her social media presence. Her posts were passionate and sincere, but in the age of viral outrage, sincerity doesn't sell. Sound bites do. To critics, she became the latest example of a Hollywood star lecturing her audience. Screenshots of her posts flooded Reddit and X, formerly Twitter, piling up faster than Disney's PR department could type clarifications. The narrative hardened. Rachel Zegler wasn't a bold new Disney princess. She was a symbol of everything people thought was wrong with modern Hollywood. And just when the studio thought the flames couldn't burn any hotter, Peter Dinklage threw gasoline on the fire. In January 2022, the Game of Thrones legend publicly slammed Disney during a podcast interview, saying he was a little taken aback that they were still making Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs in 2022, with dwarfs living in a cave. He called the concept fucking backward. Within hours, Disney scrambled to respond, releasing a statement that they were reimagining the characters to avoid reinforcing stereotypes. The result? The dwarfs were out, replaced with a group of magical creatures of various sizes and genders. The move seemed progressive at first glance, but the backlash was immediate and fierce. Dozens of little-person actors came forward, pleading with Disney not to erase roles that had been among the few available to them in major studio productions. The studio tried to pivot again, reshooting crowd scenes and eventually settling on a bizarre compromise. One real dwarf actor surrounded by 6 CGI magical companions. To critics, it looked like inclusion by subtraction, a decision that satisfied no one and alienated everyone. By the time late-night hosts and commentators got hold of the story, Snow White had gone from a fairy tale remake to a running joke about Hollywood's self-inflicted wounds. Bill Maher, never one to resist a political punchline, summed it up on his show. They spent $240 million to make a movie about inclusion and managed to exclude everyone in the process. The audience laughed, but for Disney, there was nothing funny about it. What was meant to be a triumphant reimagining of a timeless story had become a cautionary tale about overreach, ego, and the perils of trying to rewrite magic for a world that doesn't agree on what magic should look like anymore. 2 weeks before the long-delayed premiere, Bill Maher dedicated an entire real-time monologue to what he mockingly called Disney's progressive pretzel. "They cut the dwarfs to be woke," he quipped, and cut dwarf actors right out of the payroll. That's not progress. That's a snake eating its own inclusive tail. The clip exploded across social media within hours, spreading on X, Instagram, and YouTube, racking up millions of views and introducing millions of casual viewers to a controversy many hadn't even known existed. What had once been a niche online debate about casting and creative choices suddenly became late-night comedy fodder and a mainstream talking point. Meanwhile, Disney's marketing team scrambled to shift the narrative back toward the magic and wonder that defined the brand. Trailers emphasized sweeping shots of enchanted forests, vibrant costumes, and Gal Gadot's chillingly regal turn as the evil queen. But what they pointedly avoided was romance. In this version of Snow White, the prince, renamed Jonathan, appears for less than 6 minutes of total screen time, and the iconic True Love's kiss has been completely removed. Songwriters Benj Pasek and Justin Paul replaced Someday My Prince Will Come with a new set of empowering ballads about self-actualization and independence. Early test audiences described the songs as catchy, polished, and full of energy, but ultimately soulless. The melodies lingered in the ear, but not in the heart. For a generation raised on the emotional punch of Let It Go, the bar for Disney magic is sky high, and this soundtrack barely brushed it before slipping away. When opening night finally arrived, the numbers told a grim story. Analysts had projected a strong domestic debut of around $85 million. Instead, the film limped to just $43 million, numbers more in line with John Carter or Tomorrowland than Beauty and the Beast or The Lion King. Social media was merciless. Reddit flooded with photos of empty theaters. TikTok users filmed near-vacant auditoriums. And the Lewistown Sentinel ran a viral headline: "Live-action Snow White receives mixed reviews and rows of empty chairs." Within 72 hours, the New York Post was already predicting a $150 million loss once marketing costs and reshoots were accounted for. Disney's PR department tried desperately to control the narrative, spotlighting glowing reviews for Gal Gadot's icy villain and Rachel Zegler's crystalline singing voice. But the damage was done. In the fast-moving arena of public opinion, perception is reality. And reality was brutal. This Snow White didn't just miss the apple, it slipped on it, tumbled down the hill, and landed right back in Maher's punchline reel. Memes spread like wildfire. the evil queen's mirror reflecting an audience score of 29%, side by side with Zegler's infamous 2022 Stalker soundbite.
Was the kind of girl that's naturally sure when it comes to love, oh no.
TikTok creators stitched her old interview clips onto footage of empty theaters, transforming her earlier comments into a kind of digital curse haunting her own movie. Behind the scenes, insiders whispered that tensions had been brewing for months. Industry gossip suggested that the atmosphere on set had turned icy long before premiere night. Entertainment reporters at EW hinted at creative friction between Gal Gadot, an outspoken supporter of Israel, and Rachel Zegler, who had reposted several pro-Palestinian threads during the 2024 Gaza escalation. Whether that political tension affected their performances is up for debate, but it certainly fed the online narrative of a divided and uneasy production. As if the optics weren't bad enough, another blow landed just 3 days before the film's wide release. The Guardian published its long-anticipated report on the movie's carbon footprint, revealing that the production had generated more than 3,000 tons of CO2 emissions. More, the report noted, than Birmingham Airport produces in an entire month. Environmental watchdogs seized on the hypocrisy, juxtaposing Disney's inclusive rhetoric with its ecological excess. 3,000 tons of emissions and 7 dwarf actors out of work, one viral post read. This isn't progress, it's parody. For climate-conscious parents already uneasy about the film's controversies, it was one more reason to stay home. By week 2, Disney's internal panic was palpable. Marketing budgets were slashed. The Spanish press junket was quietly canceled. Theatrical exclusivity was shortened to just 45 days, a move designed to salvage at least some audience interest on Disney+. Analysts saw right through it. Trade outlets called it damage control disguised as strategy. Privately, executives began reviewing other upcoming live-action projects: Tangled, The Princess, and The Frog, even Moana, reassessing everything from tone and budget to casting and promotional rollout. Nobody at the studio wanted the next billion-dollar property to wear the scarlet W for woke bomb. Yet, buried in the ashes of this spectacular failure lies a hard-learned lesson for Hollywood's biggest dream factory. Audiences didn't reject diversity, modernization, or even change itself. They rejected condescension. Viewers want evolution, not erasure. They crave sincerity over sermons. When Kenneth Branagh's Cinderella, 2015, honored the emotional beats of the original while granting Ella genuine agency and inner strength, it earned $500 million and a new generation of fans. When Aladdin let Jasmine sing her power anthem speechless, but still embraced the charm, color, and romance of its source material, it soared past the billion-dollar mark. Disney once knew how to balance progress with nostalgia, to modernize without moralizing, to dream without lecturing. The Snow White remake's collapse serves as a glittering cautionary tale about what happens when a studio forgets that fairy tales don't survive because they evolve. They survive because they still make us feel. The difference, when you strip away the noise, is respect. You can update the drapes, sure, polish the dialogue, modernize the costumes, even tweak the pacing, but you don't bulldoze the castle. That's the line between homage and hubris, and Disney's Snow White remake tripped right over it. Bill Maher, never one to mince words, captured the sentiment perfectly in his closing monologue. "You can preach," he said, "or you can enchant. Do both, and you'd better be Shakespeare." It was a line that cut straight through Hollywood's glossy PR armor and distilled the entire debacle into one uncomfortable truth. Audiences don't come to fairy tales for lectures, they come for wonder. And when a story forgets how to make people feel that, all the CGI in the world can't save it. What made Disney's 1937 Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs so revolutionary wasn't just its animation, it was its sincerity. It was a hand-painted love letter to innocence, to bravery, to the idea that good triumphs over evil if you stay kind and true. The remake tried to rewrite that DNA, to reshape its soul for a century obsessed with self-empowerment slogans and performative progress. Instead of asking, how can we share this magic with new eyes? The filmmakers asked, how can we correct what was wrong with the old ones? In doing so, they turned a fairy tale into a focus group. The result was a film that felt more like a thesis statement than a dream. The new Snow White didn't simply remove the prince, it removed the sense of wonder that came with him. It didn't expand the story, it explained it, dissected it, justified it to death, and that's where the enchantment evaporated. As Bill Maher joked, They cut the dwarfs to be woke and cut the dwarf actors right out of the payroll. His quip went viral not because it was cruel, but because it rang true. In trying to avoid offending anyone, Disney somehow managed to offend everyone. In the aftermath, Rachel Zegler began the long process of damage control. Her interviews became gentler, her tone more reflective. In a Teen Vogue Q&A, she called the original Snow White a landmark achievement in cinema history, and thanked fans who grew up with the 1937 film and still gave our version a chance. It was a thoughtful gesture and a clear attempt at reconciliation, but the internet has a long memory. The clips that painted her as dismissive had already been memified, captioned, and embedded in the cultural bloodstream. The apology earned polite headlines, yet it couldn't undo months of bad optics. Hollywood can forgive a financial flop. Those happen every year. But the audience, especially in the social media age, rarely forgives what feels like contempt. So what's next for Disney's fallen princess? Insiders whisper that an extended director's cut is already being assembled for Disney+, one that restores several of the musical sequences cut from the theatrical version and even brings back brief cameos of the dwarfs in a reimagined dream sequence. The plan, according to leaks, is to recapture a bit of the old magic, to give fans what they missed without publicly admitting what went wrong. Maybe it will land, maybe it will fade quietly into the streaming archives alongside other corporate course corrections. But regardless of its fate, this remake's true legacy won't be measured in dollars or emissions. It'll be remembered as a creative cautionary tale, a mirror held up to the modern industry's worst impulses. Every studio from Burbank to London has that same mirror now pinned above a whiteboard. Scrawled in red marker beside notes on diversity initiatives and brand synergy is the silent reminder: modernize the trimmings, not the heartbeat. The dwarfs didn't need to be erased to make Snow White stronger. The prince didn't need to vanish to make her independent. Strength and romance are not mutually exclusive, and a story that once inspired generations to whistle while they worked didn't need to be rewritten as a lecture on why whistling might be problematic. Because at its core, Snow White was never about submission. It was about hope, about finding light in darkness, kindness in cruelty, courage in fear. Those values are timeless. But in its attempt to modernize, Disney traded timeless for timely, mistaking moral superiority for storytelling. And the audience noticed. They didn't feel included. They felt scolded. They didn't see magic. They saw messaging. By the time the curtain fell, the mirror reflected a painful truth no executive wants to face. The fairest of them all is still the story that makes people feel something. The version that lets a child believe that good can win, that love can heal, that dreams, no matter how naive, are worth chasing. The 1937 Snow White made people believe in happily ever after. The 2025 version made them argue about hashtags. So the next time a producer waves a beloved fairy tale script and says, "Let's fix it," remember this cautionary parable. Remember the dwarfs who vanished, the prince who lost his kiss, and the princess who talked herself into a box office blizzard. Remember how a company built on imagination somehow forgot how to dream. And before the ink dries on another reboot announcement, ask the only question that truly matters. Are we adding new sparkle, or are we sanding off the shine? If the answer is the latter, you don't need a crystal ball or a magic mirror to see how the story ends. Just listen carefully. The faint sound echoing through the Hollywood halls isn't applause. It's Bill Maher's laughter bouncing off the walls of a studio still wondering how it managed to turn a fairy tale into a fiasco. Thanks for watching! If you enjoyed this deep dive, don't forget to like, subscribe, and drop a comment below. Tell us your take. Should classics evolve or stay faithful to their roots? Either way, we're reading every single one, and as always, we'll see you in the next story.